We're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody. Again, my name is Nicole Miller. I work here at Vermont After School. And as we're getting settled, I just want to continue to thank you all for what you're doing to work with children and families and youth during this time, especially as you finish up summer programs and kind of go right into fall and thinking about how you can best serve youth and families during this time. We really appreciate everything that you're doing. A little reminder about Zoom, should anything weird or internet goes out and we lose the meeting, we will follow up via email, but we will all cross our fingers that internet holds stable and that we don't have that kind of an issue. Auburn's going to be sharing with us most of today, but as she's talking, if there are things that you agree with or you have questions during the training, please feel free to use the chat box, or if you have the full version of Zoom, there are the reaction buttons down at the bottom, and that's really helpful. If you agree with something or seconding something that she's saying, if you just want to like give a hand clap or a thumbs up, it really helps presenters as they're talking to a room full of people virtually. And a couple of things I just want to share with you. Keep staying in the conversation. You guys are doing a great job with that, even though things aren't always feeling 100% right, or you're still trying to figure things out and there's a fair amount of uncertainty still. Keep in that conversation, don't back away. And we'll keep working together to support one another as we do that. And the second thing is, thank you all of you who have already signed our petition to keep after school in the conversation and at a statewide look at how we're doing that as a state. So thank you for your signatures. If you know others who still would like to get involved and hear more information about what's happening on that level, they can still sign, and we certainly would love them to do that. Related to that, many of you might have heard Governor Scott's announcement yesterday about looking at how we can support school-age children and their need for care as schools are reopening in their various models. If you haven't heard, he announced an additional $12 million of the CARES funding to address this need, and we're really excited that he recognizes that need. Holly is usually our host for these calls, but she is on some calls this afternoon actually right about that issue. And as soon as we have more details to share with you, we will get them out to the field as soon as we can. And lastly, I just want to share, we know how hard you're working and the importance of self-care and how hard it is to take time for that. That's why we're so pleased to have Auburn Watersong with us today. Auburn is the Director of Trauma Prevention and Resilience Development at the Agency of Human Services. And she's going to be talking to us about how we develop our own resilience, prevent and manage vicarious trauma and burnout. And with that, welcome, Auburn.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me here today and for this opportunity to talk to you all. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah, good, great. Well, I'm just so happy to be with you all, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about why. But before, I just wanted to do a little bit further introduction of myself. I'm Auburn Watersong. I use she, her pronouns. I identify as lesbian, Abenaki, single mom, Vermonter, deep roots in Vermont, and I'm again just so happy to be here. I also want you to know that I worked for over 25 years, all in Vermont, in human services work. I've worked with children who've experienced or witnessed domestic abuse or sexual violence, and youth as well. I've worked with primarily women, but also men who've experienced domestic and sexual violence. And that was where the great majority of my work has been, in the field of trauma. I'm also an ordained Episcopal priest, and I've worked as a chaplain in a level 1 trauma center. So I have experience with the physical trauma as well as the emotional and psychological trauma that so many live with. And so I just want to give you that little bit of background. I'm now in like systems work and policy work, but it's really fed by my on the ground interaction and experiences with people who've experienced trauma up close and personal. So I wanted to share that with you by way of introduction. And if you are so inclined, and if you can see and reach the chat box on the Zoom, if you wouldn't mind actually just putting in your first name, and then right next to it, just like your first name, comma, and then let me know where you're from, what organization or county. I'm just trying to locate like the breadth of who I'm speaking with, that kind of thing. So you could just put in, like I would put Auburn AHS, you know, you could put in whatever your after school program, Montpelier after school, Barry, whatever. That would be great. And then it would just give me a sense of like, who's in the room, I guess. That would be wonderful. Thank you so much. I can see them coming through now. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and you're going to see a slideshow that we're going to go through. We'll just jump into that right now while you're all sharing on the chat. So bear with me while I get my own bearings here on share my screen. Now, oh,
Lost you for a second,
I
Auburn.
think I lost it. Hang on one second. Let me try again. There. You should see a title screen. Do you see that? Okay, good. I'm like, okay, where's the title shot? Wonderful. So here's what we want to talk to you about today. I want to share with you ways that we can develop resilience. And, you know, the work that you all do is really helping youth develop their resilience. And at times we can forget that how important it is to keep managing our own and preventing the effects of prolonged stress and vicarious trauma and burnout. And so that's really what I'm here to talk with you about today. So we'll start by talking about the definition of vicarious trauma and burnout, and then talking about what it looks like, what it feels like, trauma and stress in the body, and the signs and symptoms. Some of this you may well be familiar with. And then we're going to talk about how leaders, if you're in a leadership role in your after-school program, how you could prevent this in the workplace, what you can do to manage it for yourself as a leader or as an employee, staff person, and actually what to do if you're already in survival mode, which it may feel like you are. And I want to totally recognize that, because I think it's really important for us to stay in reality, to be able to name the stressors that we have, that we're facing, and really recognize our own limits and our own boundaries. That's part of just maintaining health and well-being. And so really naming that, if we're in survival mode, what does that reality look like and feel like, and what can we do with that? So before I begin, I just want to do this. I want to say, from the heart of a single mom, I'm going to get verklempt, sorry, to all of you after school folk out there, I want to thank you. This is my son, Gabe. He is, and actually, I don't know if some of you may have worked with him. He's 21. He is currently a student at the Tokyo College of Music who's been displaced by COVID, and he's home with me. He is an exceptional oboist, and he is a composer. He's fluent in Japanese, and I fully attribute this to the fact that he was engaged in a very active after-school program from the time he was 11 until the time he graduated and went over to Japan. And he also associates his success to his after-school program. And I asked him this, actually, I just took this photo a half an hour ago. I asked him if I could share this with you all. He said yes, and he says, oh, I feel a little awkward. But I was asking him again to tell me what the after-school programming meant in his life. And I said, I felt like as a single mom, it saved my butt. And he said, saved your butt, you know, saved my butt too. So it's really been, I could go on and on. It's been an amazing thing that it's this young man has developed it with all the strengths and skills that he has. And I attribute that to all of the healthy risk taking and skill building that happened in the third space. And so thank you for that. So before we go on, I want to take a moment to just check in with you all. And we're going to use this little scale. And if you would put in the chat box where you feel like you fit on this scale from 1 to 10 right now. So low energy, depressed, exhausted, depleted. If you're there, you're probably between 1 and 3. We have this sort of like green wave in the middle that says 4 or 5, 6 or 7, you're in that. You might be on the low end of that. You could be more up around 7 where you're feeling a little agitated, excited, hyper aroused. Maybe you did some exercise before you got here and you're pumping. And so if you could share that with me, that would be great. I really appreciate that. And Nicole, I can't see the chat without leaving my screen. So if you would be able to tell me what you're seeing for numbers in there.
Yeah, I'm so pleased to feel like I'm not alone either. There are a lot of people in the 4, 5, 6, 7 range. Like we're not feeling 100%, but we're going with the flow the best that we can.
You're in the flow. Okay.
Yeah,
well,
and a 3 and the 9 at the same time, Maureen. I love that.
A 3 and a 9. Interesting. You go swing back and forth maybe, yeah? Yeah. Okay. So fairly balanced and in the flow right now. So I want to take a moment and just feel free to look at the screen, but what I'd like to do is just take a moment to get centered before we start in this presentation. And there are a number of ways to do that. If you want some quick mindfulness exercises that you want to practice yourself, I'm sure you probably use them with some of the kids you work with. But we're just going to try that right now for ourselves. So if you're in a comfortable position where you can put your feet flat on the floor, I just want to invite you to do that. Place your feet flat on the floor. And just take a moment, and if you'd like to shut off your video right now for a moment, I invite you to do that if that feels more comfortable to you. You could just also lower your eyes, or you could close your eyes, whatever is more comfortable visually. And try to keep your spine straight, and you want to sit up, but in a relaxed position with your shoulders. Let your shoulders relax just a little bit. And just try to breathe normally, however you would breathe. And then I just encourage you all to do a shoulder roll. Just roll your shoulders up and back. Do that a couple of times. And then let's roll them forward a couple of times. Okay. And now we're just going to do just a couple of head rolls. We're going to just gently drop our head forward, and then very gently, don't force anything, just roll your head around to the side and back, and to the other side and forward again. And then let's just go in the other direction with your head. To the side and back, and to the side and forward. And then lift your head up. And one inhale in and out. And now what I'd like you to do is just take your hands and just drop them down by your side. Let your arms hang by your side. And then I'm just going to ask you to shake your hands. Shake them both vigorously. From your wrists down. Just give them a good shake. Keep shaking as I'm talking. Keep shake your hands. Shake your hands just as hard as you can. Give them a good shake. Keep shaking. Okay, maybe let your elbows shake a little bit now. Get those really shaking. Get some blood flowing down to your fingertips. Keep it shaking. Okay, and now stop and just let your arms hang. Let's see if you feel any tingling in your fingertips, in your hands. See if your fingers might feel fatter or thinner. So different sensations. Okay, then just bring your hands back to your lap. And then we're just going to take one breath in, big breath in and out. Okay, thank you. All right, now if you'll come back and if you want to turn your videos back on, that would be great. And I'll talk a little bit more about why we did what we did as we move through this time today. But thank you for indulging me in that moment of grounding. So what we're going to talk about today is vicarious trauma. Secondary traumatic stress is what it's called. There are lots of different words for it, and this is what we're going to be focusing on. So before I go on, Nicole, can you help me with this bar that is on the right-hand side of my screen? How do I make it smaller? There we go. I think I got it.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Okay, great. I see how this works. Okay, wonderful. Sorry about that technology moment. So what is vicarious trauma secondary stress? You may have heard of this before. It's the stress you may experience due to empathy with others that you see going through trauma. So if you're actually seeing physical trauma, say if you're a healthcare worker, somebody right on the front lines of injury or illness or death, that's something where you might experience secondary traumatic stress. But people can also experience this, as you know, through empathy with others who simply talk with them about their traumatic experiences. And you may experience this, of course, in the after-school programs with families and youth that you're working with who may be experiencing their own traumatic or prolonged stress at home. And so you're sort of either witnessing the effects of that, or you're working with families where there's a lot of complex trauma. And after a while, as we know, if you're likely in this work because you're a very empathetic person, and that can be really, really stressful for you as a worker and as a caregiver. What is burnout? When we talk about burnout today, we're talking about that limit, when you're hitting that limit, that physical and mental exhaustion that results from the long-term job stress. And I would say now, you know, COVID has been with us since February. We're in the long term, and we're looking at something of a marathon going forward, right? It's not going to end quickly, suddenly, and tomorrow. And so that unpredictability and the length which we're looking at can really add to the long-term job stress. And the effect is that it reduces our ability to cope with our own environment. And we'll talk a little bit about what the signs and symptoms are of burnout, but you probably know them or know of them. Fatigue, frustration, changes in attitude like cynicism or a sense of helplessness. You're not getting pleasure out of your work anymore or any other responsibilities. And there's many more signs or symptoms that we'll talk about. What it's really important to remember is that all of this vicarious trauma, prolonged stress, lives in the body, okay? And when we talk about it living in the body, and you know this probably from working with youth as well, that it's not only in the brain, which we have a lot of research on about how trauma affects the brain, but it also affects the autonomic nervous system. And so we got to pay attention to that. And as we go forward through this presentation, I will share more about that with you. You may be feeling like, oh yeah, I get the whole brain effect, right? I'm sort of, my decision making is a little low right now. You ever see a squirrel try to cross the road and they're in that place where they're like, I think my decision making might be a little bit outside outside my control right now. They go back and forth and back and forth, and they try to decide whether to run, and you're hitting the brake and you're not. It's that same kind of feeling right now. A lot of us are having trouble with our prefrontal cortex and our executive functioning, which I'm going to talk about as we go forward. Let's see, this doesn't want to, there we go. So how many of you, let me see if I can see this. How many of you are familiar with Dan Siegel's hand-brain model? If you have your video on and just want to raise your hand, I can see you. How many of you are familiar with this? Yeah, I can see you out there. Oh, thumbs up, good, great. Okay, cool. Yeah, so there's a lot of folks out there. And the reason why I share this, and I'm sharing this with you, we use this a lot, of course, with kids. It's an easy model that we can use. But I want to share this with you because I think it's a good reminder for us about what's happening to us as well when we're under stress, right? And so this is that hand-brain model that talks about, and if you can see me in the video, you can see this is the brain stem. This is the limbic system. Your thumb is the limbic system. And that is where all the irrational thinking, the fight, flight, freeze, collapse, big emotions, anger, fear, anxiety, all of that is in your limbic system. And then you have your prefrontal cortex. And if you were to hold the brain like this and I'm turning my head sideways, and you can see that this forehead is this part of your hand is the prefrontal cortex, where you're doing all that executive functioning, the decision making to cross the road. Like if you're the squirrel and you're in your prefrontal cortex, you're good. You know how you're going to cross that road. But if you're the squirrel in your limbic system, you might have some trouble because it's feeling pretty emotional on the side of the road, right? And so, and a lot of us are there right now because we're experiencing the stress of COVID. We're experiencing the stress of this reckoning with racism and racial trauma that we're in the midst of right now. And then, just the changes in our own households, much less the households of the kids that we're serving and working with. So a lot going on makes it really hard to stay in that prefrontal cortex where all the decisions are made, where there's logic and reasoning and consequences. Some people call that prefrontal cortex the air traffic control system, right? Sometimes that goes offline and it's hard to get it back. It's important, and we say this to folks that we work with and serve who are experiencing trauma. We say, okay, if we know that they're not able to be fully in their prefrontal cortex because of the trauma they're experiencing, why would we ask them to make 5 decisions in a day, right? If we're administering, for example, a benefits program to a family in need, and they're stressing out about how to feed their family, and we're asking them to fill out an application that's 15 pages long and then decide, right? So I have these conversations all the time about how our systems reactivate trauma for people who are not able, and none of us would be necessarily able to be fully in our prefrontal cortex. So that's the kind of stuff that you need to know maybe happening to you right now. And so it's important to first name it, recognize it, and then let's talk about what we can do to manage that, okay? And also, just the fact that you can recognize, oh, I'm forgetting things, I'm forgetting words, I'm having trouble making decisions, I'm irritable, I'm not being compassionate or kind, all of these things that are indicating that you're not in your prefrontal cortex. It's really, those are warning signs for you that you need a break or other things, and we can talk about what those other things are. I've put in this slide a link to the hand-brain model, and I'll send this slide deck to Nicole, so she'll have that. Did you want to say something, Nicole?
Yeah, we're not seeing your slide advance.
I haven't advanced it yet. Do you see the
Okay.
do you see the Dan Siegel's hand brain model?
No, we still have the squirrel.
You still have the squirrel.
I know.
That's so weird. Okay, hang on. Why is it saying, huh? It didn't, it's showing on mine. So hang on. I had to unshare it again. Oh, it's so weird. Try it one more time. Sorry about that, folks. Let's see. Do you see it now?
Now we do.
Oh, that's so weird. Okay, great. So this is what you'll see. And I'm glad you said that because this will lead us into the next slide. The other thing that we need to remember is how our brain is connected to our nervous system. And this is something, you know, this is why I used the check-in that we did where we put ourselves on a scale of 1 to 10. You remember that wave that was sort of 4 to 7? In a healthy nervous system, right? The sympathetic part of our system is the one that really directs the body's involuntary response to danger or stressful situations, right? So there'll be a flash flood of hormones that boost the body's alertness, and the heart rate will go up and send blood to the muscles. That's like the sympathetic arousal and activation. And then you'll settle down. The parasympathetic is really the body's rest and digestion. And, you know, in a normal course of a day, you may go a little bit up and a little bit down, but you stay in this window, right? This 4 to 7 window. Some of the trauma practitioners and experts call this the window of tolerance. I think Dan Siegel calls it that as well. So this window of tolerance, that's a normal kind of functioning nervous system that you'll see. But we may actually, in our most difficult times, or we may actually see this in others who are having their most difficult times, it may feel or look, unfortunately, more like this. So this is when traumatic stress comes on. You see this like this red bolt of a lightning bolt. Supposing that that is a singular traumatic event, not necessarily prolonged stress, right? Let's just assume it's just a traumatic event, one event that interrupts this normal functioning healthy nervous system. Then what happens is all of this reactionary experience in our bodies and in our brains, right? It happens in our brains, it happens in our nervous system. And at times, if we're out of that normal range, if we're out of that window of tolerance, we can get stuck to on or stuck to off. And I'm curious, for those of you, since you're after school folk, you work with kids, I don't know if this is your experience, but when I've worked with kids who, especially kids who've experienced really traumatic events and are also living through prolonged stress, I see this. It's almost like visibly evident in kids. Whereas as adults, we learn to hide these things better. So if we're stuck on agitated, if we're stuck on number 9, you might not know that. Like we might be able to kind of hide that and function. But it's so much more evident, I think, in kids. And so a stuck on kid, for example, might be that one that gets labeled in the classroom as disruptive, right? That is like the high energy, agitated, that kind of thing. And the stuck off kid might be the one who the folks are thinking there's something wrong. He's falling asleep all the time. He's not getting sleep at home, which may not be true, but he's stuck off. He keeps shutting down, or she keeps shutting down. And that's that low energy. It's depression, but it plays out, right? It could be depression, but it plays out in the body, right? That's what we're talking about, is being stuck on or stuck off. And then what happens? And we as adults develop coping mechanisms for when we're in those phases, right? So if we're stuck on agitated, we might be the one who grabs for a glass of wine at night to kind of bring us, I got to get back down into the normal range. I'm not judging that at all. I'm just saying this is one of those things. You're agitated, this is how you bring that down, right? If you're stuck on off, you may be one who feels like, okay, I have to eat more to get my energy up, right? And so what happens when we're stressed and we're stuck on off? We might gain weight, right? Because we're eating more sugar, right? So there's all of these ways that, you know, on the spectrum, they can be healthy to unhealthy, right? But we make choices to regulate ourselves. And some of them we do without even knowing we're doing them, right? We're just like, oh, I'm so agitated, you know? And the next thing I know, I'm like, I got to get a glass of wine. We just do it out of just automatic kind of response. Then then when they become unhealthy, right? That's when we start to realize, okay, we've really got some challenges here, right? We're really stuck on, or we're really stuck off. I don't know. I just want to check with folks and say, have you ever noticed when you're working with kids outside of the normal range? Have you seen a kid that's been like stuck on, or a kid that's been stuck off? I just want to raise your hand if you've seen a kid that you can think of right now off the top of your head. Oh yeah, they're definitely one of those kids who's stuck on, or they're stuck off. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah. I see a lot of hands. I've had that experience myself. And it's interesting to work with kids like that. We have kids that are sleepy, and trying to get them to move and join in the activity is an important way to bring them back into that window of tolerance, if you will. So be thinking about where you are and what you are doing under prolonged stress. Are you agitated most of the time right now? What do you need to do to bring yourself back into that window of tolerance? Are you stuck on off? Are you feeling like disconnection, disassociation? You're not digesting well, you're tired all the time. And what would you need to bring yourself back up? It all starts with this awareness, right? What does this all tell us? Well, it really tells us that trauma and traumatic stress live in the body. It's not like we didn't know this, but it's important to remind ourselves of this, that it's living in our body too. We as adults, we hide this well, but it doesn't mean that it's not there. There's a double negative. It is actually still there, even though we seem to be coping better. We can see it more in kids, but it's still in us as well. These are a few books that I would recommend, and some of them you may have already read. The Body Keeps the Score is very old, and it's relatively old in the movement, and it's like it's foundational work to this understanding of trauma in the body. In an Unspoken Voice really talks a lot about somatic experiencing and how to discharge trauma from the body, and how the body releases trauma and restores itself. And My Grandmother's Hands, I recommend to everybody right now, especially in this era of what we're working with around this awakening around racial trauma. My Grandmother's Hands sort of takes racial trauma, somatic experiencing, and the nervous system, and how trauma lives in the body. And here's a book. It brings them all together. And this author has some great, he was interviewed on Point. So if you Google this particular author of My Grandmother's Hands, you will find some great resources and recordings of him speaking about trauma in the body from a racialized perspective. So I just want to share those with you. They're really important. And what the themes are of these books are, like, I mean, and this is distilling them down to oversimplified, are really about discharge and restoration. So that exercise that we did in the beginning of this training, where I had you put your arms down by your side and really shake your wrists vigorously, and then feel the blood flow in them afterwards, that was just one small way to sort of demonstrate to you how quickly and easily our bodies process, right, emotion or release, and how you can quickly feel a change in your nervous system, your circulation. Really important to remember that you, even though you're working with kids all day, you also need to have those moments to discharge and restore, okay? Very important, because whether you know it or not, because we're so good at hiding it and still functioning through it as adults, your body is carrying that, and you might not even know it until you actually shake your wrists. Like, you might not even know how much you're holding until you start to discharge it. there are numbers of ways to do this. You know, you could use mindful movement or exercise or dance. Laughing and crying has this surprisingly, it has a surprisingly strong effect on being able to reset your hormonal self, reset your nervous system. Um, uh, Creating, of course, and you know, with kids, playing and puzzles. I would say with the elderly, there's also a way to get them get them into their prefrontal cortex moving, with elderly folk, elder Vermonters doing puzzles, things like that. I put this suggestion of resisting in there because when we're talking about racialized trauma, and some of us, and because I pass for white, I don't experience like the same needs necessarily and the same experience of trauma that my brothers and sisters of color do. Now, I have learned, and I'm learning more about this, that one of the ways to build resilience for people of color, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, is really to actively resist the oppression, the racism, to protest, to do the to claim place, to claim respect and domain. That is a healing experience, and it is an act of discharge for them. And so I'm just recommending to you here this podcast called Therapy for Black Girls. It's a racial trauma episode. It might be something you might be interested in listening to. I think it's about 35 minutes long, and it reveals some of how to process racial trauma. And of course, restoring, and we all know we need time to just refocus ourselves, get away from the screen, look up at the sky, mindfulness, awareness, rest. And also I want to mention spiritual feeding. The other thing I forgot to mention in my introduction, I'm an ordained Episcopal priest. And I know from that experience how important it is to have ritual and meaning making in your life, especially with things that don't feel like they make sense. And I got to say right now, a global pandemic kind of hits that button for a lot of people, right? It's like, how is this happening? And I can't make sense of it. It's so large, it's so big. And so ritual and ceremony that brings in meaning making is a wonderful way to help manage prolonged stress and trauma exposure. It's important, especially for cultures that are not the dominant culture, who really connect with spiritual practice. So it's something to keep in mind. It's something to keep in mind for yourself. If you grew up Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, mainstream, Buddhist, just be thinking about, how did ritual or ceremony feed you growing up and support you growing up, and where you are now as an adult? Is this a time to reach into those places, to give yourself some rooted meaning making that feels a little bit more grounding? That can be very restorative. So what are the warning signs of burnout? This is maybe known to you, but I think it's really important to take some time and really think about this, because if you see yourself in any of these, I want you to just pause and think about what you need to do to take care of yourself. So here we have a cartoon of a bunch of penguins looking at one penguin that is absolutely convinced that we just haven't been flapping hard enough. And the other ones are like, yeah, not so much. And I think this is really important, because symptoms of burnout don't look the same in everyone. One of those penguins sitting on the side may be actually burnt out, and not able to really move as fast as the one who's flapping away. Another penguin right next to them may be actually just fine and just resting, right? So you could have a person who's burnt out standing right next to a person who's doing just fine, and they look exactly alike on the outside, right? But you got one who's flapping his wings and he's totally fine. He's not like agitated or anything. He's just out there flapping his wings all the time, or he may be totally agitated. And so it's really hard to know. And so I'm going to just ask you to think about some structures to get the support you need, to let people know, and to be looking for these signs. So here's some signs. Sadness, depression, or apathy, of course. We've talked about some of these. Easy frustration, blaming others, cynicism. I don't have to go through the whole thing. Isolation and disconnection is a really interesting one right now because I feel like some of us are already there just because of COVID. Some of us may find some gallows humor coming up, inappropriate humor or sarcasm coming up for us, that if that's out of character for you, just do a self-check and say, oh yeah, that's been me. You know, I've been kind of feeling like I'm laughing when I shouldn't be lately, you know, at weird things that seem really kind of dark. Those are some warning signs. There's further warning signs. Here we have a cartoon of I guess of wolves, right? And one of them is saying, my question is, are we making any impact? And I had this up here because I feel like at times we can feel overwhelmed. Like you have a lot of families you're working with a lot of complex trauma, and you don't feel like you're making any difference at all. And I want you to try to remember too that you may not see the difference that you're making, right? And that's what's happening with these wolves. If they're making a difference, they might not be seeing it, but it's likely they are, right? So some other signs of burnout: guilt, self-blame, poor self-care or hygiene. You're tired, you're exhausted. The grandiosity, if your work is overwhelming and you feeling like it's becoming so huge and important that nothing else is, it's about balance, right? It's about, is it right sized, right? If your work is not right sized in the rest of your life, a work-life balance, that's also a sign. Feeling like a failure or nothing you can do will help, that's the wolves over here in the comic strip. Feeling like they're not sure they're having an impact. And of course, if you're thinking unsafe thoughts, or looking for a physical or emotional scapegoat, or considering self-harm, those are definitely warning signs. And we'll talk more about those as we go along. So how do you prevent burnout and manage it in the workplace? So here we go. This dates me, right? Lassie. I don't know how many of you remember the Lassie cartoon, or not cartoon, but the Lassie show. She was like a collie, or I guess it was a he, the dog was, who seemed to always go rescue people, right? And so here's Lassie about to rescue this person, and this person says, Lassie, get help. And so Lassie decides to then go to, obviously it looks like a therapist's office, to get the help that Lassie needs, right? And I put this up here as a reminder that you cannot pour from an empty cup, right? We know this. We also know this as parents. If you're a parent, we know this in our personal lives, right? How we are not, if we're not our best selves, it's hard to be really good for others as well. So Lassie is pointing that out. She's like, I am gonna go get help first. I'll be right back. Of course, we would never leave anybody maybe drowning in mud. I don't know what's happening there, but we would never do that. But I'm just saying, this is a good illustration of this fact that we can't pour from an empty cup, and we really need to take care of ourselves. So as leaders, you need to build the roots of the strong tree. Okay, and you could do that in structures at your workplace. So that's why I have this picture of this tree with the strong roots and this beautiful top. Because as leaders, there are things that we can do to make sure that the staff in the agency we're working with or in the organization we're at are really able to move through these incredibly stressful times. So one way we can do that is developing criteria for triaging. And I know that's a medical term, but really what it means is when you're looking at where the highest needs are, and if you have to move quickly in those decisions, make sure that you know what the criteria are for making those decisions, right? Make sure that those are clear and that the people who work for you, with you, under you, however you want to say that, the staff that work with you are really clear on how to do that. Making sure you have the necessary equipment and resources for staff to do the jobs as efficiently and effectively as possible. And I know that's sort of like a constant issue right now. We're getting like COVID recovery money into the system because we're realizing that, you know, we need more equipment and resources for the things we're facing, even if it's like PPE and other really challenging items that are really needed to do this work. You need to understand and plan for a stretch caseload. So for example, I did this presentation with people at the Vermont Department of Health who are seeing like huge growing responsibilities, like the epidemiologists managing how many tests they're managing and things like that daily. And just knowing and planning for what one human can actually do. So as the leader, you're going to look at your team and say, okay, what caseload can we take on? How far can we stretch right now? And what does that look like? So it's, again, it's about planning, rotating work duties and allowing for staff to take self-care time. So as a leader, really looking at your team and making sure that you're able to move staff in and out of their responsibilities as much as you can so that everybody at least gets some break if possible. Scheduling regular and supportive communication. And then that can be via email or in person if you're meeting in person distanced. It can be over Zoom. But in particular, when it comes to regular and supportive communication, you want to remember also that it needs to include guidelines, education. This is for leaders especially, human resources information on how to take leave if you need it, what benefits you have, what all the limits and supports are for folks on your staff. And then of course, as much as possible, supporting flexible scheduling so that folks can meet their own childcare needs, elder care needs, their own mental health care, take care of their own physical well-being. These are all things that leaders can do, structures that can be put in place to help support them. Establishing a work time or workload threshold beyond which no employee, even during COVID-19, should work. When I was a chaplain at the hospital, we would take on-call shifts that were 24 to 36 hours. And we had plans for if one of us had been awake for that entire time, if there had been just emergency after emergency, we needed to have a plan to like tag someone else and say, I'm out because I'm not going to be any help at a certain point, right? And so there's that knowledge of where is that wall for your employees, plan for that coverage, make sure nobody works beyond those walls, and that their well-being is still supported. Establishing peer support structures are really important, and you as an individual can do this at work as well. You can find a peer in your office and say, I need you to check in with me, or will you check in with me? I need to have a peer that is, just being mindful, and you can set it up yourselves, or you can, as a leader, set up peer support structures. If you're working in an organization or an agency that's quite large, you can set up, a peer support network that's ready and on call if somebody feels like they need someone to talk to. or you can just encourage your immediate team to pair up and be support people for one another. Whenever there are difficult decisions to be made within your team, especially the more difficult the decisions are, the more important they are, the more you should make sure that the decision making is shared. And that is because if you put the most important decisions all in the box of one person, that stress load right now is very, very intense. So you want to make sure that as much as possible, you can disperse some of that. Even if it's like 3 people will make these decisions together. It takes the weight of stress off of an individual. So that's really helpful. If you can get clinical supervision or support for your frontline staff, that is super helpful. And that, for those of you who aren't aware, is really about having somebody with some sort of mental health, a mental health clinician type with a license or certification experience. And ideally, also with experience in the field. And then they come in and they can support support the whole team or support 3 or 4 people, however you want to do it. They can come in regularly every 2 weeks just to have an open, like, okay, we're going to have a clinical supervision Zoom call, every 2 weeks or once a month with a clinical supervisor who understands the work, who is also a clinician and can actually process the stressful cases and keep confidential at the cases that you're working with and how it's affecting you, right? That's an example of clinical supervision. There are other ways to do clinical supervision, but I know from my experience with it, it's a super, super helpful tool in times of great stress and in work that is greatly stressful. So that is really important and excellent tool to have. And of course, as a leader, reinforcing time off. So important. So this is how you build the structures for the root system that you need to get through this marathon of real stressful workplace experience right now. If you're going to make sure the whole tree is healthy, you have to focus on hate right now. If there's nothing else you take away from today as leaders and actually as individuals, communication right now is really key, and it has to be handled so gently and carefully. And that's why I have kindness written 3 times, because even if you screw up, if you're kind when you do it, man, you will not believe how far that goes, right? But being transparent about what is happening right now and why is so important. Things are moving very fast with COVID. Things are changing really, really quickly. At times you think you're going down this one road with like how we're going to open up, right, for schools. And then in a week, things could all be different, right? And so it gets really stressful if you don't understand how the decisions are being made or why. And even as leaders, if you can say, we're moving really fast and I don't have it all worked out yet. Like, just be transparent about it. Like, this is what I know and this is what I don't know. Just be transparent. I mean, we're all human beings. We know things are moving really fast and really, really are really stressful. Be authentic, say who you are and how you're feeling about it. Like, bring yourself into it as a leader, not just top down. And humility. And with that, I would put curiosity. Be humble, be curious, ask, say, I may not have all the answers. This is what I know right now. We're trying to work through this. Tell me more about what it is you need. Maybe I don't understand what it is you're needing right now. Humility. And then kindness is so important. If you're an individual staff person at an after school program right now, and you're not necessarily in a leadership position, here are some things that you can do to prevent and manage any trauma exposure that you're feeling right now at work, okay? So firstly, I see this little cartoon. So it's just like, this is so me. I'm like the one on the wheel that's running around, and there's somebody like over on the side that just had an epiphany. I had an epiphany. I could just stop running. I could just sit down and this wheel would stop spinning. I wish it were so easy. But truth of the matter is, we can manage our own trauma exposure. And here are some ways to do that. First of all, I want to say, if you're engaged with a mental health provider right now for your own well-being, yay, kudos. And if you're not, I might suggest to you, come up with a plan. Okay, think about how to actively engage mental health support now. Find out where your available mental health clinician is in your community. Like literally what building, and like what, like, are they, is it the community mental health provider, or would I choose to go to a private provider? Does my insurance cover it? Be ready, even if you don't want to access it right now, act like you do and have a plan, because there may come a time when it's like, okay, I got to do this. So that's really important. Immediately communicate gaps in services or protocol that cause job stress. And this is, so what I'm saying is, to leadership or to people with power and responsibility in the work that you do, if you see something that is actually creating more job stress, and I don't mean complain, right? Whine, no, I mean, name it. Because truthfully, the leader, in this phase of the game with COVID moving this fast as it does, your leader may not know that's a gap. Your leader may not know that you're experiencing that job stress. So it's important to communicate with them what your needs are. Just say, I'm realizing, I mean, this could be with a healthcare worker, it could be, I don't have the PPE I need to do this work. But it could also be, I'm realizing that we don't have a protocol in place for when kids move from their final period in school to me. And this is causing me stress. And I need to know what that protocol is, right? And by now, I'm hoping, gosh, I'm hoping they know that. But what I'm saying is, you need to communicate what that is, because it's right now, things are moving so fast. You don't want to make an assumption that people should know, right? You want to make sure they do know what it is that's causing you stress. And then remember that if you take time off, it's time off. I mean, this is hard for me. I just came back from a week-long vacation, and the first 4 days, I could not get away from my computer. I was trying. It was just habit, right? There was nothing there I needed to, I could really do time off. But sometimes it becomes that habit, that attachment that you have to work, and you need to stop it. And this is where a peer could come in helpful. So if a peer is seeing you emailing when you're not supposed to be, like at 10:30 at night, they see a timestamp on your email, your peer could say to you, hey, how you doing? I'm noticing, you know, you're emailing really late at night, and I'm hoping you're taking time off. And just as your peer support person, I'm just saying, like, are you okay? And like, what do you need? Those are important ways that a peer can help you, for sure. I want to do a time check because I'm talking a lot, Nicole. How am I doing?
You are right at 2:00.
Okay, great. So we just have a few more slides to go and we'll be all set. So other opportunities to prevent and manage. This is the peer support accountability. Avoid glorifying overwork, and role model, again, that healthy balance and limits. So here's that comic that says, no, not there, please. That's where I'm going to put my head. And this may be the overworker here, and you may feel like that person right now. And so again, it's just stressing, finding those balance. And as leaders, you really need to role model that balance right now too, if you're in a leadership role. Survival mode. Sometimes we're there, right? Sometimes we're in survival mode. So what do? Name it. And name it if you're a leader. And I want to say this again and again, because I'm worried right now about our leadership a lot, because I don't see leadership in any organization really having an option to let down right now in human services, especially in social services. It feels like it's a desperate time, and we have to stay at the wheel. And so I'm really worried about that. And I think what we need to first start with is saying it's okay for leaders as well as staff and employees to name that they're in survival mode. Just let someone know. I'm in survival mode, and that's going to mean a few things, right? When I'm in survival mode, it's going to mean that I can do less, but I'm going to do what's essential, right? So first of all, remember that you're not alone. Even as leaders, you're not alone. And given the immensity of these situations around race, around COVID, sometimes simply doing the next right thing is the best we can hope for. Count it as a win, right? If you are maintaining, like, these are the kinds of things you have to think about. Where you would normally be pushing yourself to excel all the time, maybe recalibrate that when you're in survival mode and say, no, actually maintaining instead of improving, right? Maybe this is where I need to be. We're maintaining because this is a marathon, and we're maintaining at really high standards, but we're not going to be maybe not taking on an extra project right now. Maybe not, right? Because we're just going to do the next right thing, and we're going to keep stepping forward that way. Accept the emotions in yourself around the pandemic, around racial injustice. Accept those as appropriate, whatever they are. Wherever you are in your limbic system freaking out on the side of the road with a squirrel, it's fine. It's fine, because this is stuff that is bigger than us individually, and really uncharted for so many of us, a global pandemic, right? Recognize that under pressure, many of us are more resilient than we give ourselves credit for. We see that in youth and kids, don't we? And we say it all the time, like, oh my gosh, look how resilient, like, because X, Y, and Z. We have that too. The fact that we're still moving forward, that we're still doing the next right thing, that's really, really important for us to remember. When you're in survival mode, and healthcare workers especially, I attribute this to them. They have this thing called the ADLs. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this, but stick with the activities of daily living. When you're in survival mode, don't let go of these things, okay? Eat as healthily as you can. Hydrate. That should be a lot. There should be a lot. Water. Sleep. Keep up your daily hygiene. Walk or move, right? We talked about discharging from the body. And as much as possible, avoid alcohol or illicit substances. And when you don't meet some of these ADLs, don't beat yourself up about it, but do know these things, if you can keep these things going, right? That's maintenance, that's maintaining, that's a win, right? When you're in survival mode, this is a win. Like, you might not want to start a diet to try to lose 50 pounds right now. You know what I'm saying? But eat healthy and get a good night's sleep. That's a win right now, because we're not in this. These are not normal times. We're not in normal times. So expecting yourself to act as though things are normal, maybe, maybe a little off balance. What you want to do is you want for sure to make sure that you're doing the ADLs, right? You want that balance back. You don't want to shift off balance by pushing yourself to do something that you would do in normal times. But these aren't normal times right now. I mean, I think we can all pretty much agree to that. It doesn't feel like normal times. So keep looking for moments of mindfulness and gratitude as much as you can. What are you thankful for? Take a breath. Take a breath. I have some resources that I can share with you on that. I'm sure you have Vermont After School has resources mindfulness and gratitude. I'm looking at Nicole, but I know Umesh has some too, and those are available if you need them. Brene Brown shared a quote from a priest that said, "If you don't want to burn out, stop living like you're on fire." And that's what I feel like. I do feel like sometimes I'm living like I'm on fire, but in normal times, you could live like you're on fire. Right now, you don't have to live like you're on fire. You can simply prevent burnout by taking a deep breath and maintaining, right? Stick with your ADLs. Remember that you are a human being and not a human doing, and that those who love us most love us not for what we do, but for who we are. And those, I mean, I know those may sound cliche and trite, but right now we need to hang on to those kinds of thoughts and that knowledge that we don't always have to be doing right now. It's really important to do what's necessary and then ease up on ourselves as far as excelling, perfecting, improving, having that, right? Having this focus to do something better or more. And remember to just maintain and care for yourself. I am going to send the slide deck, which has some links to it on racial trauma information and resources, and then some basic trauma and resilience training and mindfulness resources. So if you want any of that, you'll have access to that. And please reach out to me if you need more information. I have a handout that goes with this that you can, I'll send it to Nicole and Umesh, and you can, share that with folks in your offices. It just talks about burnout prevention and vicarious trauma that goes with this training. So I'll send that and this slide deck to you all. So thank you so much. Thanks for listening to me. Chat, talk away.
Auburn, thank you so much. So much of this hit home for myself, and I was messaging with a team member about just, where we are on so many of these things too, and I'm sure that's the same for all of you. I want to open it up. Auburn's with us for about 20 more minutes. If you have questions or comments, things you want to share with the group, I'm going to pause for a minute and see if there's anyone that would like to share either in the chat box or certainly feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I would love to hear if something resonated with you all, or if you have something to share that got prompted by this. I didn't have a chance to look at the chat box while I was, so I'm looking at it now.
Auburn, there's a lot of agreement around when you're taking time off, the time is off.
Auburn, I will add one thing because I think I have mentioned it to my team so many times. When you talked about like setting limits and not overdoing, when we started working remotely, I used to wear a hat. That was to notify me that it's my work hat. So as soon as I was done with my work day, I used to take that hat off. And whenever I came close to my computer in my off hour, I'm like, oh, I don't have my hat, so I don't need to work right now. So that was the physical reminder. And if you can have some sort of, I don't know, it could be a badge or it could be some kind of like, and our IT person had a headphone or earphone that she used to use just for work. So if you can have something like that, that will help too.
Yeah, it's great to have those physical cues too, right? Right, somebody quoted Winston Churchill. Maybe dark humor, but true. When you're going through hell, keep going. And I do think in survival mode, that's sort of what the next right thing, right? And I don't know about some of you, but I think being an empathetic people being in the social services, I find that we disproportionately push ourselves beyond our limits, right? Because we're serving others, and that's what we want to do. We want to push and push. And there's really, because we are in this marathon, this COVID marathon that we're in, it's really important to maybe think about ways in which you can comfortably pull back a little bit, just a little bit, so that you are, you're running on your tank of gas, but you've got to get further than you ever have before. Think about it that way. You're in a car, full tank of gas. You've got a reserve tank, right? But you're wanting to stretch this out a little bit longer. So how are you going to do that? What might you change in your routine, in your day, to make sure that you can actually weather that length of time? Mm-hmm.
Sue, I see that you have your hand raised. Did you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, thanks. I will say, totally guilty of 10 p.m. emails, but it's such an important reminder that we set the tone. And so when we're sending emails at 10 o'clock, the expectation can be that that's when everyone else is going to be responding. And it's not really fair. I'm telling myself this, but it's not really fair to the people that work with us, or for our boards to be emailing us at 10 o'clock at night or on Sunday, and that it's completely okay. So important to be told over and over again. It's completely okay to set those boundaries and say, you know what, this can wait till Monday morning. This is not an emergency.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for saying that. And I do want to say, even as peers, not as leaders, but even as peers, we also don't want to send a 10 p.m. email, because then it doesn't matter if you're above or in the hierarchy or not. You're still you're adding to that culture that this is acceptable. This is what we do here. I do want to say, I'm one of these people who sometimes has trouble going to sleep at night if I can't get something out of my head about work. And just for a tip for those of you who have the same issue, I have actually written the email and saved the draft so I could go to bed, and waited until the next workday starts at 8 or 8:30 or whatever, and sent it then, to preserve the culture of the workplace, but at the same time be able to get sleep. And I know that's not ideal, because really what you do want to do is what Umesh said, is have those times when you stop, right? Or maybe it was even like 5:30, it's still after hours. You finish that email, don't send it. Save it as a draft, send it out in the morning. Those are things you need to be thinking about. How do I take care of myself and my workload? And how do I protect the culture at the office that says, we need to have our own personal non-work time and space? So it's really important. Thanks for your authenticity, Sue. I appreciate that.
What I do is I just like write down, to try to get away from my screen. I always read before I go to bed, before I fall asleep. That helps me. And I have a notepad by my bed, and I just write down that, like physically writing down, like even, just points, like, okay, I'll do this, like whatever comes to your mind. Or even like even sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I reach like something like my mind is racing. It's like, no, okay, write this down and leave it for tomorrow, like you said.
Right.
Or like, what also helps me, and I try to remember, like it's almost like a mantra, like be in the moment. Like, so when I start being, like, oh yeah, I need to go do this. I just go outside, and we are in Vermont. This is just the best place to be, like right now. And it's like, go outside, and I'm like, no, I'm in the moment. I'm not thinking of what emails to write later when I come home. This is what I'm looking for. I'm looking at my flowers. I'm looking at, my neighbor's pond, whatever you encounter on your daily walks, or any walk you can take, or you know, just remove yourself, you know. That's what I do. Like I either put music on, dance, or just go outside, you know. And
Mhm. And again, you see, that's an example of discharge and restoration. You're moving away from where you are. You're taking yourself out of your current situation. And I know that just sounds so small, but it really is only the small thing that you need to do that really helps. If you need to get up and get away from, just get up and get away from your screen, literally for 3 minutes, walk around the house and come back in. It's amazing how it actually resets your system, your whole body. And I mean, I would encourage you to look at some of those books on somatic experiencing and the Peter Levine book, because it really does talk about how our bodies are wired and how we can actually physically shift ourselves in and out of stress, you know, and discharge and restore. And I think it's really useful to, like, literally, you've been looking at a screen for how long now? You know, after this, get up, go outside, look up, like literally just like shift. It's so important. Yeah, and you're right. Vermont is perfect for it, right now.
Auburn, there's a question in the chat box about how do you address when your supervisor or supervisory workers don't honor your time off?
Yeah, and again, this is when I say, this is that communication piece, right? This is going into them and saying, okay, here's what I need for my work to make my work better. It's actually not time off so that I can play. It's time off so that I can work better, right? And how do we, you know, and I have done this before in other workplaces where I've said, you know, I'm also concerned about my colleagues. I'm concerned about you, my leader, my supervisor. I'm worried that, you know, the work that we're doing could be better if we all were able to take breaks, and the breaks that we need to take. How do we make that happen? So I mean, I just encourage direct, like, calm and kind communication, assuming the best in that person, assuming they may not know. I mean, they may know, but they may not know. They may not be allowing breaks because they're stressed that the organization isn't going to get done what needs to get done. And so how do we address the leader's stress right now? Because if the leader is so stressed that they're not letting staff have that time they need, then the problem is not that the staff isn't getting any time. The problem is that the leader is under stress, right? So it's like, going to the root of the problem is, how do we help this leader understand
I got
that,
sick.
oops, sorry, I had a little, how do we help the leader understand that the stress load is creating actually more stress? And so how do we unwind that? How do we help the leader get whatever the leader thinks the organization has for a goal? How do we meet that goal and do it together? Right now, I think it's very easy to I don't want to say easy, maybe I want to say easy. Yeah, I think when we get under stress, it can be a natural experience to point rather than to call out rather than to call in, I would say. And I think more than ever, we need to call each other in and say, I need your help with this. I need time off. And, you know, I need to figure out how to do that. And can you help me? So rather than pointing a finger and saying, you know, you're the evil boss that's not letting me have time off, which I know maybe what you want to do, but I think the calling in is really important right now. I think our bosses are really stressed out too, and so sort of leading with that empathy that you have. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's a good answer. Maybe other people on this have better suggestions for that, but and that's where I'm coming from right now. I'm finding that when people are really, really stressed, they're losing kindness They're losing, the emails become short and curt, and communication becomes rough and quick. And in actuality, I would just challenge you to think about, actually, if you want to write a quick email, write it and don't send it. Take a deep breath and then make it gentle. Put in, hi, I hope you're well. Thank you so much. Those little things, I am telling you, they go far right now because people are so stressed out. And you can help set that culture at your office by changing your tone in your emails and your communication. If you change that, you'll be surprised how much people respond to that and need that right now. And it goes a long way to bringing down that sense of those prolonged stress. Little things, really.
On that note, Auburn, you know, what so many of us will be facing in September will be working directly with youth in the moment. And so how do we take that pause that we might desperately need at that moment? You know, when we've got a group of 10 youth that we're working with, or how do we create that culture for staff? Are there some quick strategies that you might suggest?
Right. Again, this is like all about planning ahead of time. I think in a lot of ways, planning with your staff. What if, running through some scenarios and thinking about peer support. We have to be able to tag each other to step in so that we can step out. Even if it's for 2 minutes, I need a timeout. Can you come? Can you take, and I understand this may be unrealistic for some people who are like the only person with those 10 kids and there's nobody else to step in for you. But I think what I want to say is the planning end and the scenario run through has to be really strong before you get into those places, so that you know what your options are for self-care in the moment. Do you have somebody set up as your peer support person? Do you have a peer support team? Do you know when things get stressful who is available, who isn't? And what your options are. And I think, you know, to get really clear on that as a worker, and for you as leaders to be able to really tighten up your team's ability to rotate and manage that caseload so that people can have the time that they need to take a breath. That's really, really important. Then there's also, and some of you may on this call have some ideas about how you've taken breaks with youth at the same time, right? Let's all sit down and take a breath, right? I don't know. You know, I know you have exercises where together you actually take a break. And that's like worst case scenario, you can't get away, but you need a break. You're going to take them all with you. Like, let's sit down and do this break together. Let's try a mindfulness exercise together. You know, so there's that, I mean, in those scenarios as well. But I do think the planning ahead of time with your leadership, and even asking your leadership, if you're not in a leadership role, saying, can we take some time to plan for when things get really stressful? You know, COVID presents a different level of fear in our work than we've ever experienced before. Can we talk about when we start to feel as workers that we're maybe not feeling safe, or we're scared, or we just need to breathe and come back? What will that look like? And do we have the ability to do that? I think that's really important too. And I just want to say, it's not too late to start any of these things. Like, I know you're like going into the school year and you're thinking, oh, well, we should have had that conversation a long time ago, or something like that. And I just want to say, even as leaders, even after the school year starts, you can still have, you know, in your regular staff meeting, just say, hey, guess what? I really want to start this peer support thing. You know, like maybe we could pair off as peer, however you want to structure it. It's never too late to put in a structure to support your staff. And I guess that's what I want to emphasize. And as staff, it's never too late to ask for help, right? To say, I need this. can we plan around this? I know with the school year, because I grew up with teachers, it always feels like everything has to happen during in-service in the 2 weeks before the kids come. And then once you kids come, you hit the ground, you're running, and there's no time. I would just say, maybe we could think about that. Maybe we could think about, maybe there is time. Maybe there is time for regular communication. Maybe there is time to take a breath together and plan a little bit. Yeah.
Any other last questions or comments for Auburn?
I do want to just, in closing, I want to tell you that as a single mom, my son was telling me this story. We were just talking earlier. I said, if you had something you wanted to say to all these people who work in after school programs, you know, what would you say to them? And he said, you know, I had the chance to feel successful in the third space. I didn't have that chance in the school system. I could focus on developing skills that I didn't have time to develop in the public school system, right? In the classroom, 45-minute classroom, 45-minute classroom, 45-minute classroom. But I got out on a mountain bike, or I got snowboarding, you know, or I got, you know, I went out, he said, and he also said he developed an appreciation for nature from the after school program, which is great in Vermont, living in Vermont. He also gained employment skills because he now teaches snowboarding. And he teaches little kids, which he learned because he said, in the after school program, I learned what it was to be part of a team. And I learned how to take care of younger. He said, I learned this, like, we were with younger and older, and I learned how to communicate. So he just went on and on and on with me, all about his after school, like all of the strengths, including like his employability. You know, he said, I would never have gone to Japan if I didn't have the after school program, because it was this confidence building, you can do it, right? And expectations that he could do it. And so I want to thank you for that, because it's beautiful. And don't forget that what you do is so important. It's so important to single income, single parent households. Yes, yes, yes. I'm telling you, you are the bomb. Do they say that anymore? But I mean, you guys, you really are so, so important in the lives of these kids and youth. And I don't want you to ever lose sight of that. And especially even now, even more so, like in spades. So thank you so much for all that you do.
Yeah. Auburn, thank you so much for your time today and sharing your family's story with us. I think that's really helpful to know too.
Yeah.
With that,
Thank you all.
everybody, we'll hope that you all have a good rest of your afternoon. Go take a walk outside.
Yeah, please do. Bye, everybody.